Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to the Texas Conflict Coach radio program. If you have ever experienced or engaged in destructive or unresolved conflict, then you know it leads to broken relationships, distrust, and damaging results. Our program will help you manage and resolve conflict effectively with strategies, valuable resources, and support. I am your host, Pattie Porter. My guest hosts, Dina Zameta and Stephen Kotev, along with our guest experts, will share our experiences, raise your awareness, and give you food for thought. We will share with you problem-solving strategies no matter what your situation is. At work, with neighbors or friends, family, and as partners. Tune in or join in the conversation every Tuesday evening. Well, good evening, listeners. Hello to you, and welcome to our series on love and relationship conflict. You know, oftentimes our relationships, there is a battle for the truth, and when truth is there, it's more than one reality. There always is more than one reality. So how do you respectfully manage these alternative realities in your relationship? The fact is, reality is so subjective. What happened, what was said, what may have been decided may look very different to each person in a situation, often resulting in an emotional standoff. And so in tonight's episode, you'll learn indicators of this problem and get some vital tools to move through these separate realities more respectfully in your marriage, at work, with your family, or friends. Now, joining me is the Couples Therapist, Susan Lager. She is a psychotherapist, author, and relationship coach based in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. She is the founder and principal of Couplespeak, providing coaching services, and the Couples Center, which provides psychotherapy services to individuals and couples who want help with relationship problems and would like to achieve more fulfillment in life. Susan is noted for being a tell-it-like-it-is clinician who gets significant results for her clients. She is also the radio host of her own program, Couplespeak, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later in the program. Now, we are taking live callers tonight, so if you're already in the studio, simply press the 1 key, or if you're in the chat room listening via the computer, not only can you leave a comment or question in the chat room, you can also call 347-324-3591 and press the 1 key and we'll let you in. And you can also participate with us on our Twitter feed using the hashtag ConflictChat. And I believe Susan also uses her Twitter handle as Couplespeak. I believe it is, Couplespeak with a C-O at the end. Susan, welcome to our program.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Patty. I'm very happy to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, it's been fun talking with you and planning, about this whole month. You know, February is Valentine's in America, and even some of the other countries pick that up. And so why not talk about love and relationships and the conflict? But how true about, the battle for the truth. So let's talk a little bit about that. Most couples at some time in the relationship have argued, and many have gotten into this battle for the truth. And we hear that. I mean, I see that in my own relationship. I've seen that in workplaces where I've coached or mediated. But what does that actually mean to you when you say battle for the truth?
It's all about different perspectives or alternate realities related to the experience of an event or a series of events. So it might be why or how an event unfolded, where it all started. That's very often a point of conflict between partners, where it all started. Who did what to make things worse? Who said what? Who's to blame? What was the conclusion or agreement that was reached around an event? So very different experiences around the same events.
Okay. So, and we will often hear, in fact, when you hear the battle for the truth, what is the language you hear them say? That says, I'm battling for the truth.
Okay. Well, signs. One sign that you will that it's happening is negating language, negating statements like, "That's not true. That's a lie. No, you didn't. No, I didn't. That's not what happened. What are you talking about? You never remember the facts." Statements like that I hear all the time in my work with couples. So mostly negating statements and defensive statements.
Okay.
Okay. And, as though they're, the presumption being that there's only one experience of what really happened. So it plays out in very common ways for couples, and it's highly problematic because couples get into stalemates around this kind of stuff, and nobody feels heard, nobody feels acknowledged, and they go away often feeling very resentful and mistrustful.
Now, we have listeners here, and they might not even recognize that they engage in this type of fighting. And so you mentioned these negating statements, which are very common, right? And, another way of looking at the battle for the truth is this fact battle, right? F-A-C-T, this fact, whose
Yes.
fact is right. So what are some other signs or some concrete examples of knowing that we are actually engaging in this type of fighting?
Well, there are four or five other major ones. One is defensiveness, which leads to escalation. So paying attention to the process, I call that the process, what is actually unfolding in the room. Generally, there's a level of escalation, which means people are getting louder, they're getting more insistent. Sometimes they're yelling. You will often hear character assassinations of one kind or another. So statements like, "You're crazy, that didn't happen, you're a liar." I work with one couple where that unfolds routinely in the room. "You're a liar," because you have a very different recollection of events. And another sign that it's happening are, what we call cognitive distortions. So globalizations, the use of the words always, never, constantly. So when you hear something like, "You're always avoiding responsibility. You never remember anything accurately. You can't ever own up." They're globalizations and they're distortions. They take maybe an experience of an event and maybe an experience that's been repeated, and it makes it pervasive, as though it's the only truth about one's partner. And then the final sign that I see unfolding in my counseling room is aggressive or stonewalling body language. So you might see finger pointing, an invasion of space, people leaning into the other one's space in a very invasive way, poking, something really aggressive, or stonewalling type behaviors like looking away, not making eye contact. And a very common one is eye rolling, which is a nonverbal way of saying, "You don't know what you're talking about. That didn't happen. You're really crazy." All kinds of stuff. Yeah.
Why do you think that people are so adamant about being, it's their truth is the truth, and fighting to be right in that fact? Why is that so important that it leads them down these very destructive paths?
Because we only see what we can see. And we are not taught, especially in this culture, to have a bird's eye kind of meta view, that there are different ways of seeing and experiencing the same event. We're limited by our own immediate vision. And I think the need to feel validated around that is very strong. The need to be right, especially in this culture, to be right. We get rewarded for seeming to be right or knowing it all, being certain. This is a culture that does not deal well with ambiguity or, different ways of looking at things. I mean, just take a look at our government and take a look at politics, and you can see that. I think it's driven by a number of things, but we have our own subjective experience of what happened, and it can be very jarring to hear that somebody else saw it and experienced it entirely differently.
Okay. So I'm just going to pause for just a second to give space to anyone who's in the studio now, either on the phone or in the chat room. If you have a question or comment, please type it in the chat, or if you're in the studio on the phone, feel free to push the number 1 key. Now will indicate to me that you would like to talk with Susan and I with a question or comment, and that's certainly optional to do that. So, Susan, when this goes on for a while, and some of these truth battles, these fact battles, can go on for years in relationships. It's one of those things, and you bring up the same argument, that happened, 15 years ago, and you're like, are we still talking about this? So what are the effects of these types of stalemates on a relationship?
It's long-term, it's very toxic. It erodes trust enormously. People feel invalidated. It is a destroyer of respect. Often it leads to contempt, a feeling that you don't know what you're talking about, you don't see things correctly, you don't hear me, you don't understand me. It leads to resentments and distance, hostility, and it can really set the tone for a relationship marked by a lot of bickering, argumentativeness. It's not good for a relationship. People need to feel validated around their experiences. People need to feel that someone's listening, someone is interested in their perspective, and when partners routinely hear that that's not the way it happened, what are you talking about, stuff like that, it's very erosive to trust and goodwill in a relationship. I've seen it lead to divorces long term. When you take this and you look at it over a period of years and years and years, and sequences that are very predictable and repetitive, this can lead to divorce.
So, obviously, when people are hearing you with these negative behaviors, all the things you said, the characterizations and the distortions and stonewalling, people are like, yeah, of course we know that would be erosive, and yet we still do it. How does it show up in your own counseling room? Obviously when people come to counseling, they're having an issue, a problem, they're having old patterns of behaviors. So how does this show up?
Well, it shows up in the signs that I talked about, the negating statements, the defensiveness, et cetera. But are you wondering about the kind of subject matter where it shows up, the kinds of issues where it's likely to show up?
It could be because, sometimes I imagine that when you address some of these things that happened, let's say something that's been a pattern, that they can't release the truth or this perception of what happened for both of them, 8 years ago, and they're still holding on to it. What are you finding in the room in terms, and we know what the behaviors are that might be showing up in the room. What is it you're hearing about why they're holding on to that?
Okay. Well,
even though you educate them, why are they holding on to that?
Because one partner, and I'm thinking about some couples I've recently worked with, a few that I'm currently working with, one partner has a pervasive experience of the other partner being rude to one's extended family. And you were very rude to my family. You are not respectful. And then you wonder why my family doesn't want to include you in events. And then the other partner will say, no, I wasn't. That's not true. Your family is rude to me. I'm not rude at all. Or I will often see it beginning around the point of entry for a problem, where it all began. See, that is feels like a slippery slope. It's the beginning of the rabbit hole, where it all began. I work with one couple where the husband experienced the wife as being very secretive and making unilateral decisions and kind of representing herself as an individual persona. And the wife would say, but you know, look at the context. Look at what preceded that. Look at all the ways that you behaved so badly with my family, with our children, ways that you undermine me, ways that you behaved like kingly and like a tyrant. Of course I made unilateral decisions and I went independent on you. You made it impossible. So it very often enters the room in the form of where it all began. And what I say to couples about that is, do you know, you could argue till the cows come home about where it all began. If you really want to figure out where it all began, you would probably have to go back to the days of the dinosaurs, because where it all began is entirely subjective, the point of entry for each of you. It's a more important question to think about, how did you each participate? First of all, looking at each other's perspective about what happened and thinking about how you participated in an event. Okay, so it plays out as where the problem began, but even when it's not about a problem, it's just about who said what, just what transpired. So it takes many forms.
Okay, excellent. So, folks, you have been tuned in to the Texas Conflict Coach radio program, and we do invite you to follow us on Blog Talk Radio, Texas Conflict Coach. I am speaking with Susan Lager of Couplespeak so far about our episode of the Battle for the Truth, and you know, what are the, you know, Susan's already mentioned a number of signs that show up that says to you and says to others that we are engaging in this very destructive type of fighting. So let's help listeners figure out how to disrupt this stalemate. What are some other ways they can do this? Because like you said, they need to start looking at each other's perspective and looking at the question, how did they participate? So what other things would you like to help them, the listeners, in disrupting this?
Okay. Well, before you can do that, that requires breaking a kind of bad trance. Before you can calm things down to look at the other one's perspective, number one, you need to be open to the possibility that you may not always be an expert about receiving the big picture, that you may not be an expert about yourself and your own perceptions 24/7, and that your perspective is limited by your own subjectivity. It's limited by what you're looking for. So I think if listeners begin with that and I will often say to clients, we could bring 100 world famous experts into this room, and 50 of them would describe what just transpired and notice things A, B, and C. The other 50 might have an entirely different view on what happened and notice D, E, and F. Now, does that make one set right and the other one wrong, or are they looking for different things and noticing different things? So I think if listeners can begin with a little bit of humility, recognizing that I'm not an expert on events, my view is my own limited view, colored by my life experiences, colored by where I'm looking, what I'm paying attention to. There's a lot that's known about that. That's a really good beginning. And there are a few other things. Would you like to hear some other things that will help?
Yes, and I liked your kind of metaphor about this limited vision, because it's really about how do we broaden our vision, or how do we, become aware of our blind spots. Maybe we need a side view mirror so we can see what we're missing. So, okay, so yes, let's look at some more.
Yeah. Now, by the way, if you're watching the debates, if anyone's watching either the Republican or the Democratic debates, they will see examples of very different perspectives on the same event. And if you're asking, well, who's telling the truth and who's right and who's wrong, you go down that rabbit hole. They slant things differently. They pay attention to different things. Different things are salient for each candidate. another thing that would be important is when you are noticing an escalation, either through yelling, getting louder, leaning into each other's space, eye rolling, some kind of aggressive or stonewalling behaviors, when you are noticing that, you're getting triggered. So you're both kind of in your reptilian brain at that point, which only knows fight, flight, or freeze. That part of the brain is not responsive to logic and all the fancy functions of the prefrontal cortex. So one of the things that's really important for couples to do, and this isn't only couples, by the way. You see this, I'm sure, in your work, in the workplace, but in any situation where it's getting heated or escalated, feel brave enough to call a 15 to 20-minute timeout. And ask for it for yourself. Don't say, you need a timeout, you're becoming a maniac. Instead, it's better to say, you know what, this is getting very heated. We're obviously not seeing eye to eye. I feel like I need a little bit of a cool down time. How about we get back to this in 10 or 15 minutes? And then when you take the time out, do some deep breathing, and where you're breathing 4 seconds in and 8 seconds out. What that does is it stimulates the autonomic nervous system, which lowers the stress response. But you need to do it for a few minutes for it to work. And you can also count backwards from 100 by 2s or 3s. That it refocuses you and it calms down a reactive brain. So you're not just pacing around another room and then going back to the argument with the same triggered brain. You're calming down a reactive brain so you can be more responsive and listen better and hear your partner better.
Good, really excellent important tips. Very excellent and very simple, but sometimes, as you said, if you feel brave enough, it feels like it's a simple request, and yet it takes courage to ask for that, to step that back.
Yes, yes, and don't just leave the room, because that gets experienced as stonewalling and very rude. You want to ask for a timeout for yourself. Nobody ever likes to hear, oh, you need a timeout, you're behaving like a maniac. No, you ask for one for yourself. Then, when you're in the timeout, what you want to do at some point in the timeout is reflect, ask yourself a few questions. Where might I have been in this situation, okay, in this problem where we're not seeing eye to eye and we're in a battle, okay? And where might I be in the solution, okay? So you recognize that we're in a kind of battle for the truth, and what might I have been doing that has contributed to that dilemma, that stalemate? And that's a really hard question to ask oneself. We're all experts on how the person we're with is behaving badly, but if we can begin to get curious about what might I have been doing that contributed to that stalemate, and what might I need to do differently to break the stalemate, okay?
All right, good.
That would be important. And then this is the all-important question. If I were in my partner's shoes or the other person's shoes, how might I have experienced this? So this is an empathic leap. It's what we call an empathic leap in the world of psychotherapy. You're leaving your own reality, your own experience of reality, and you are trying to get in the shoes of the other person. So if I were him or her, how might I have experienced the same event? Okay? And that's probably the most important question that you can ask yourself.
And, do you find that when you use that technique with the couples, whether privately or together in the same room, do you find them feeling challenged with that question? Very,
very challenged, because what we're used to doing is debating and defending our version of reality. What we see on TV, we see people negating each other and just digging their heels in, defending reality. We're taught in conversations to have very quick volleys, not to listen, and we're taught to make our point and make ourselves understand, not to understand the other. And, in Eastern tradition specifically, there's a tremendous value in seek to understand, not to be understood. So it's a much more receptive frame. It involves more listening. It involves more attunement to the other, paying attention to the experience of the other. It's hard. It's really hard to do that.
It is, especially when you're, in your head trying to defend, your truth, and that's what, like you said, that calming down and taking that. If you're truly, listeners, wanting to learn how to break these stalemates, these are excellent strategies and tips. And some of them seem simple on the, you write it down and you're listening to it and you're like, well, that's pretty simple. But some of these really require quite the effort and challenge. So don't give up too soon. Don't say, oh, it's not working. But really know that some of these questions are very challenging, and you can do that. And I like the way that you called it an empathetic leap. What other things? One of the things that you just kind of said toward the end here is really about when you say seek to understand first before being understood, is this place of being curious, right? Really being at a place of curiosity. Can you say more?
Well, before I say something about that, I like the fact that you're referencing the fact that this takes time. This takes time, repetition, and practice. This is not a skill you are going to develop overnight, because it kind of goes against our quick soundbite debate-like attitude in America. So with time and practice, it gets easier. In terms of the curiosity factor, that is really critical. What I encourage clients to do, what I try to do in my own life, is to return to the partner after you've had this time out, and to return with curiosity. And so you might make a statement like, this was not my experience of what happened. It wasn't my experience, but can you tell me what happened for you? That's a key question. So you're not going back pretending that you didn't have your own separate experience. You're acknowledging it wasn't my experience, but can you help me understand what happened for you? That's the big $1 million question to ask.
Okay, I love that. So I'm going to repeat it again. So this was not so if you're going back to the partner with this open mind, you're not trying to, fake it out and say, like dismiss your own experience, but you want to be able to say, this was not my experience. I really want to help me understand what happened for you, or what your experience was.
Okay, so it's language it's inclusive language. It's language that presumes that there is more than one experience of an event. And yes, I had my experience, and it sure felt like the truth to me, but I'm not in your shoes, so help me what happened for you. And I find that just this one sentence alone is very helpful for clients, because people don't want to go back to a partner pretending that they didn't experience what they experienced. And I say, I'm not asking you to do that. I'm not trying to teach you to do that, but just to recognize I had mine, help me what yours was. Help me understand what yours was.
And I have to add that when you ask that question, listeners, in a genuine, authentic, curious way, that you then pause and listen. You can't then interrupt as they start to tell their experience and then interrupt it.
No, it doesn't. It goes against all of this. Yes, it requires listening and receptivity, taking it in.
All right. So we're getting very close to the end here of our program. And so before we go into our closing and giving an assignment to the week, our listeners are very used to us doing a call to action type of thing. Is there any other strategy or anything else that you wanted to say that you didn't have an opportunity to say?
No, but I think the homework for listeners would be to pick any issue where you noticed yourself in a relationship having a kind of battle for what really happened. Pick that issue, and if you can practice that, think about the possibility that maybe I'm not an expert on myself. I didn't marry this person, or I'm not in this relationship with this person because they're an idiot, to go back to the partner and ask that question. You know, what we've been talking about was not my experience of events.